Have you ever thought about how a simple sentence can change your life forever? Lucas was living a love story that, over the years, seemed to be the center of his life. But one day, what he least expected happened. She looked into his eyes and said something he never imagined he would hear. "You are not good enough." And what seemed to be the end ended up becoming the beginning of a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Now, after months of pain, new beginnings and overcoming, she reappears wanting to come back, but Lucas is no longer the man he used to be. The question is, can the love that once existed between them overcome everything that happened? And is he willing to open his heart again to the person who once made him doubt himself? If you have ever experienced something like this or are looking to overcome, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the channel and get ready for a story of forgiveness, resilience, and, above all, a great personal transformation. Lucas's life seemed to finally be stabilizing. After years of dedication to his wife, he believed that everything was in its right place. They had built a family, created dreams together, and faced challenges like any couple. But one day, she came to him with words that he never imagined he would hear. "You are not good enough for me." That was not just a cruel phrase, but a blade cutting his soul. The pain was not only from the rejection, but from the doubt that she sowed in his heart. What had he done wrong? Where had he failed? The conversation that followed was a sea of words that made no sense to Lucas. She talked about her own dreams, her dissatisfactions, and how she felt that he was not up to what she wanted for the future. Lucas's heart broke when he realized that for her, everything they had built together was no longer enough. Those words echoed in his mind for days, creating a whirlwind of emotions. But he knew he had to move on. Still, the pain did not disappear immediately. He spent days in silence, alone with his reflections. What do you do when love is put to the test in this way? When a person you consider your soulmate turns their back on everything that seemed right? Lucas's pain didn't disappear like a nightmare that would be erased upon waking. But over time, he began to realize that true healing didn't come from simply forgetting. It was something deeper. He began to reconnect with himself, his passions, his goals, and the life he had left behind while he was so focused on pleasing her. With each small step, Lucas felt like he was rediscovering his purpose, a journey he never thought he would have to take. Little by little, he returned to activities that made him smile, a hobby he had given up on, running on the trails where he used to think alone, and even reconnecting with friends he hadn't seen in a long time. Each day, he found himself stronger, more centered, more himself. During this time, he also began to reevaluate his view of forgiveness. The anger and hurt were still there, but he knew that letting those emotions take over would be trapping himself in the past. That was when Lucas began to understand that forgiveness was not a favor to his ex-wife, but a liberation for himself. Forgiving did not mean that he had to accept what had happened, but rather that he would choose to live without that burden. It was as if the pain was slowly turning into strength. And although the process was long, Lucas felt the change within him. Something profound was happening. He was beginning to rebuild himself, stronger than ever. Months had passed since Lucas began his healing journey. He felt stronger, more self-assured, and more focused on what really mattered. It was not easy, but he was finally at peace with his decision to move on. And, as if the universe was conspiring to test his strength, that was when he saw her again. She appeared out of nowhere at the cafe where Lucas usually went to reflect. She was different, She seemed more tired, with a lost look in her eyes and an expression of someone carrying a huge burden. When he saw her, the world seemed to stop for a moment. The feelings he thought were already buried began to resurface, and the pain of betrayal was like a wound that began to burn again. She approached with hesitant steps, and he looked at her, with the same calm he had cultivated in the last few months. What would she do now? What did she want from him after so long? The apology was in the air, but Lucas knew that this moment was not about her, but about him. I was wrong, she said, her voice trembling. I thought that what I wanted was something different, but I realized that without you, my life has no meaning. She looked deeply into his eyes, perhaps searching for a reaction, a sign that he still had feelings for her. Those words touched her like a distant echo. But deep inside, Lucas felt something much stronger, an unshakable certainty that he had changed. He was no longer the person she had known. He had already found his way again, and as hard as it was to hear those words, he knew it wasn't time to turn back. Although Lucas was certain that he had already overcome the past, meeting her reopened a battle within him that he thought he had won. In the silence that followed her words, a storm of emotions began to build. There was a desire, a part of him, that wanted to believe her excuses, that wanted to hear that she was willing to change, that she truly missed him. But at the same time, there was another part that knew he could not be fooled by the pain of the past. He had already invested too much of himself in a relationship that made him question his own identity. Was he ready to make room again for someone who had abandoned him? Could this pain truly be forgotten? As she looked at him, waiting for an answer, Lucas realized that the biggest challenge was not what she wanted, but what he himself wanted for his life from now on. He remembered all the nights when, alone, he looked in the mirror and promised that he would never go back. He had found his strength the moment he decided to walk away from her, and every step he took since then was a sign that he had matured. But deep down, he still harbored a small shred of hope, a thread of desire for life to be different. The silence between them grew longer, and Lucas felt he had to choose. It wasn't just about the pain of betrayal, but about choosing who he wanted to become. He could continue to be the person who always expected something in return for the love he gave, or he could free himself completely and move forward with confidence, without fear of starting over. The silence between Lucas and his ex-wife seemed to weigh more and more. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the choice he was about to make. It was then that she, with a more vulnerable look, decided to share something she had kept hidden for a long time. Something that perhaps could help him understand what had really happened between them. I never told you everything, she said, her voice breaking as if a great truth was about to come out. I was afraid of being judged, afraid of hurting you even more. But after all this time, I think I need to be honest. She paused, searching for the right words, and Lucas just watched, unhurried, trying to understand what she meant. She took a deep breath and revealed the root of her dissatisfaction. It wasn't just about him not being good enough, as she had said. The truth was that she felt an enormous pressure in her life, an internal pressure that made her feel like she wasn't reaching her own dreams and expectations. She looked to other people for the validation she felt she wasn't getting from him. It was a void she didn't know how to fill, and out of fear of confronting her own weaknesses, she projected that pain onto him. Lucas listened silently, without interrupting, as the pain and anger he felt slowly began to transform into a painful understanding. She hadn't abandoned him because he was insufficient, but because she was struggling with her own insecurities and fears. Perhaps she had expected something from him that he could never offer, answers to her own inner conflicts. The revelation made her more exposed, more human to him. She wasn't just asking for forgiveness for the cruel words she had spoken, but for her failure to admit her own weaknesses. And as she spoke, Lucas realized that the person he had been in the past was no longer who he was now. He no longer wanted to be trapped in the role of someone who tried to fix others. After his ex-wife's revelation, Lucas felt as if he had crossed a fine line between the past and the future. He now understood what had happened, but as painful as the explanation was, he knew it wouldn't change what he had experienced. The pain wouldn't go away just because he understood her reasons, but the guilt and resentment that consumed him began to diminish. He realized that even though she was opening up, he no longer needed to carry the burden of her guilt or the failed relationship. She looked at him, waiting for an answer, a sign that he still harbored some desire to get back together. But Lucas knew he couldn't go back. He had already gone too far back to get lost in the same cycle again. He felt a new strength within himself, as if life itself was asking him to free himself from something that was no longer part of his story. Lucas took a deep breath and calmly looked at her. The words that came out of his mouth were different from anything he had imagined. "Say, I understand, and I forgive you," he said in a calm tone. "But life has taught me that I can no longer carry this weight. Not for you, nor for myself. I moved on because, deep down, I knew that I deserved something more. And today, I know that this something more is myself." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, but at the same time, something inside her seemed to break too. She knew that she could no longer ask for something that he had already left behind. Lucas's gaze conveyed the freedom that he had finally found, a freedom that, even with pain, came with the acceptance that some stories are not meant to have a happy ending, but to teach. She smiled, sad, but at the same time, grateful for the understanding he demonstrated. She knew that, deep down, that conversation was the last chance for them to truly say goodbye. After meeting his ex-wife, Lucas felt a mix of relief and reflection. He knew he had made the right decision, but the experience made him think deeply about how relationships and failures often teach us more than victories. He realized that for so long he had lived in the shadow of what he had lost, forgetting what he could still build for himself. In those days that followed, Lucas began to see life in a new way. He no longer saw himself as someone who had been abandoned or who had failed at something. He understood that, first and foremost, he needed to rediscover himself. The journey he began to take was not just about overcoming a relationship, but about rebuilding his own identity. Over time, he began to focus more on himself, his passions, and his life purpose. He began to take on new projects, developing his skills in ways he had never imagined before. He felt more confident, more fulfilled, and most importantly, more at peace with himself. He felt renewed, as if he had been given a second chance to be who he was truly meant to be. He also connected with others in a more genuine way, without the burden of expectations and fear of rejection. He realized that over time, he had learned to love himself more. He learned that true happiness did not lie in what others expected of him, but in what he himself believed was possible. Life finally seemed to offer a new beginning that he was now ready to embrace. But as he went through this healing process, something inside Lucas still gave him the feeling that the past had not been completely resolved. He knew that, in order to be truly free, he needed to say goodbye to the cycle of pain, even though his ex-wife had already moved on. Months passed, and Lucas found himself in a very different moment in his life. He was no longer the man who had once felt small, inadequate, as if he had lost everything that mattered. Now, he saw himself as someone who had reinvented himself, and it was in this new cycle that, unexpectedly, he came across a new person. It was a quiet afternoon, and he was attending an event that he had not planned, just to distract himself and continue with his new adventures. It was there, in the middle of a casual conversation, that he met Raquel. There was something special about her, not in a superficial way, but because of her genuine energy and the way she saw the world. She was also on a journey of personal growth, and the connection between the two was instantaneous. Lucas noticed something he had not imagined feeling so soon, a sense of peace and empathy. There was no rush, nor the urgency to seek answers. They talked about life, about challenges and overcoming, and Lucas felt comfortable sharing what he had experienced. Raquel listened to him attentively but without judgment. She understood the pain of loss, and more than that, she knew how to get back on her feet, how to turn pain into a force for transformation. As time went by, Lucas realized that his ability to love was no longer tied to the expectation of being validated or filling an emotional void. He was falling in love in a more mature, more balanced way. It was a relationship without rushing, without pressure, and for the first time he felt he could build something without the fears of the past. When he realized it, he realized that he had reached a point where the past was completely behind him. The anger and hurt had been replaced by a deep understanding of what he needed to move forward. The real transformation was not in his relationship with her, but in his own heart. He had forgiven himself and rebuilt himself. Now, Lucas was ready to build a new story, but this time, without rushing. He no longer sought to be happy. He was happy, with all his imperfections and all his learnings. He was at peace, and with that, he knew that nothing would stop him. After all the encounters and twists and turns, Lucas finally realized something that few have the opportunity to see. True transformation comes from within. He no longer needed her forgiveness or anyone's approval. He had found himself, rediscovered his purpose, and finally understood that happiness lies in being who we are, with all our flaws and learnings. What about you? Have you ever been through something like this? Have you ever had to reinvent yourself after such deep pain? What would you do in Lucas's place? Would you forgive and give someone a second chance, or would you move on with your own journey? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share this message with someone special. Because just like Lucas, we all have the ability to start over.